skills and revive traditional knowledge related to mangrove management. In particular, women's knowledge and participation in the decision-making process needs to be encouraged in the Conservation and Resilience Initiative. Finally, greater civil society participation and implementation of stronger accountability mechanisms is needed. We need to continue to provide space and resources so that impacted communities are involved in the Samoa process, so that this high-level meeting is as well attended as the Climate Summit and the SDG Summit. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Jojo Frank U.T. Kelly for your statement. And I now give the floor to Mr. Mukisa Kitui, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, to make a statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A few weeks ago, in Geneva, we convened the first United Nations Trading Forum. We put at the center of its deliberations the interface between trade and climate, broadly inspired by political leaders from the small island developing countries who participated fully and helped to develop resolutions, which I was tasked with presenting to this august assembly. On financing, we agreed that whereas the international community has offered to serve as the insurer of last resort for climate-related emergencies, the truth is that ex-post measures are insufficient and ineffective as a way of dealing with emergencies of climate-related crisis. Ex-ante provisions of funds and instruments will improve the efficiency, predictability, and speed of response to natural disasters. Similarly, given the already rising level of indebtedness among seeds, the prevalent use of debt instruments in climate finance raises concern. Innovative approaches in the area could include conversion of bilateral and multilateral debt into special funds in addressing environmental and economic shocks. On adopting trade policy towards seeds, it's agreed that seeds are losing from climate-related terms of trade changes because they are net importers of food, which faces high trade costs and especially in specialized goods with little trade. It's also important to provide seeds with flexibilities in line with their vulnerabilities, including strong safeguards, which can be triggered after a natural disaster to provide enough policy space for recovery. On strengthening the blue economy, that oceans and seas form an essential component of the economy and cultural identity of the seeds that needs to be preserved. We must strengthen existing international commitments and develop new ones, including under United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and in ongoing negotiations at WTO. On seeds energy independence, the seeds have insufficient access to renewable energy technologies. Correcting this must also be a focus of seeds trade policy going forward. We at UNCTAD are committed to continue facilitating more work in a positive way from the trade community on the challenges of the seeds. And next year in Georgetown, Barbados, we hold UNCTAD 15, where the issue of climate and trade will take center stage, and we invite all the other players to come forward with concrete contributions on how we can deal with the challenges of the seeds. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development for your statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Eliza Benito Whitley, Special Envoy of the Premier of the British Virgin Islands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. 2 years ago, the British Virgin Islands was devastated by Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The recovery of our islands remains fragile as we rebuild our society after the catastrophic damage caused by the 2 Category 5 storms. We have been greatly concerned as of late by the succession of hurricanes and tropical storms that have narrowly missed us in recent weeks. The prospect of being hit again while we are so vulnerable is frightening, especially after seeing the destruction of Abaco caused by Hurricane Dorian. Another direct hit to our islands would further set us back and dim our prospects for recovery. Excellencies, the British Virgin Islands made representation at the Third International Conference on Small Island Developing States in Apia, Samoa in 2014. Coming out of that historic meeting, we aligned ourselves with the Samoa Pathway and made great strides in striking a number of genuine and durable partnerships to support our sustainable development. However, all of this was severely disrupted by the hurricanes of September 2017 that destroyed our infrastructure and took 5 precious lives. Recovery has been costly, especially in rebuilding with greater climate resilience. Insurance payouts have covered some of the $2.6 billion in loss and damage, but a significant portion of our public infrastructure is yet to be rebuilt. Despite the cost, progress is being made. It was just 3 weeks ago, on the 6th of September, that we were able to reopen the central building of the main secondary school that had laid in ruin. We are very grateful to all the private sector donors who have helped rebuild our school system and helped to rebuild the wider society. There's much more work to be done, but this will require additional financial resources, external support, and new partnerships. Excellencies, the British Virgin Islands is now at a stage in our recovery where we are preparing to make a paradigm shift from recovery to sustainable development. The groundwork for this is currently being laid with the assistance of our UN partners to whom we are grateful. ECLAC's Caribbean Sub-Regional Headquarters in Port of Spain is providing us with technical assistance in the preparation of a national development plan that will take into consideration the Sustainable Development Goals. Simultaneously, UNDP's Barbados and OECS office is providing technical assistance for the development of a Blue Economy Roadmap to help us optimize the potential of our marine sector. As we go about these processes, we will strive to link them with the Samoa Pathway, whose international framework for SIDS is appropriate for our circumstances. The major challenge for the British Virgin Islands is the cost of sustaining our recovery. The British Virgin Islands per capita income was considered too high to receive official development assistance grants from international donors, despite the catastrophic events that damaged 80% of all building structures. The eligibility criteria on which international donors operate are so rigid that not even a direct hit from a Category 5 hurricane was enough to justify a temporary relaxation of the rules to help a damaged society get back on its feet. Let me commend the UK for its leadership in trying to get these rules adjusted after the hurricanes of 2017, but this remains unconfirmed. The problem remains for the British Virgin Islands that in the event of a natural disaster, the primary option to fund reconstruction are loans. Hundreds of millions of dollars will have to be repaid on the back of a population of 30,000 people. Debt in our region is already unsustainable, and it is not a long-term solution for us. Other forms of external support are needed in such circumstances, particularly in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic event. It is also unfortunate that the British Virgin Islands continues to be denied access to the Green Climate Fund and Global Environment Fund that could assist greatly with helping us build greater resilience. We must all keep in mind that the effects of climate change and degradation of biodiversity do not discriminate based on political status or income level. The British Virgin Islands will continue to advocate for greater access and inclusion in the international support offered to SIDS. However, the existing constraints in the international architecture necessitate that we continue to seek out new partnerships to meet our objective of climate resilience and sustainable development. Excellencies, I'm grateful for this opportunity to update on the British Virgin Islands' implementation of the Samoa Pathway. I thank you.
I thank the Special Envoy of the Premier of the British Virgin Islands for your statement. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the last speaker in the interactive dialogue of multi-stakeholder Roundtable 1 on the progress, gaps, and challenges. Before concluding, I would like to remind participants that the multi-stakeholder Roundtable 2 on priorities, solutions and the way forward will begin promptly at 3 p.m. in this chamber. The meeting is now adjourned.
Previous generations and current generations. We don't come here as a proud people asking for handouts. We don't want and will not be mendicant. What we want, no, what we need is fiscal and policy space. Fiscal and policy space to achieve sustainable development, to be nimble, to adapt, and to innovate in ways that allow us to be true and faithful to the task of bringing prosperity to our people, or as in the theme of this General Assembly, to eradicate poverty, to educate our people, to include all such that there's not some outside and some inside. We want an international order equally that recognizes that there must be different policy prescriptions to suit the circumstances that we all have. And we can still be friends, small and large, north and south, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, all different races, all genders. An equitable and just international order that is truly built on the principles of justice and fairness for all and not just for some. A United Nations that recognizes that as 74 years old, we must be able to have difficult conversations as mature people and solve them. Many in the developing world were persuaded or required to abandon policies that were designed for the majority of our population to be transformed. And those policies were fashioned to adopt a consensus that was settled in Washington, D.C. and named thereafter. And that ultimately, regrettably, was about the consolidation of wealth in the hands of a very few. That's why we have seen the growing inequality that we have seen in the world over the last few decades. That is why too many people over the world have become cynical about governments and about the benefits that they can bring to them. The fueling of the greed of a few threatens to undermine what little gains we have made since independence. And we judge ourselves harshly because independence is a recent phenomenon for us. Others who have taken 150 years to get where they have gotten are still stumbling and falling. And you want to judge those who have had less than 50 or 60 years to operate in a world that has not been made in their image and that does not reflect their interests. This is the fate, my friends, of simply too many. And Mr. President, despite our small size, the 14 countries of the Caribbean community have been able to play leadership roles of international import. I can't stand here today without talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that has become the smallest nation of the world ever to be elected to the Security Council to sit on it. We are proud of them. In addition, and I want to speak to this, because when CARICOM was confronted with the unfolding situation in Venezuela, I accompanied the then chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, to meet in this building with the UN Secretary General in January of this year. And we met with many delegations, and some said we were wasting our time. And some said the time for talk was already over. And we said then, as we say almost 9 months later, the time for dialogue, the time for talk, my friends, can never be over in a world that wants peace and prosperity. We don't take sides, but what we know is that you cannot propel war over dialogue. The people of Venezuela must be allowed to decide their own future in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter, principles of non-intervention, non-interference, prohibition of the threat or use of force, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. It is regrettable that other multilateral organizations have not followed their own charters. And that is what makes the actions of our Secretary General of the UN more laudable, for refusing to breach his own charter and take actions even though member states have hurled into the recognition of those unelected. That is why Barbados readily agreed to the request by Norway, and I salute my colleague Prime Minister who just left this platform, to host the talks between the Venezuelan parties. We salute the government of Norway for walking the walk and taking leadership in facilitating these talks. Equally, we regret that the talks have broken down. And we remind people that dialogue remains critical if there is to be a meaningful outcome and benefit for the Venezuelan people and its neighbors, not just its neighbors on the Latin American continent, but its neighbors in the Caribbean Sea, because people forget that Trinidad and Tobago is less than 7 miles from the coast of Venezuela. Our Caribbean Sea must remain a zone of peace, and for that we shall fight. Mr. President, I speak plainly and without fear, because from independence, Barbados' foreign policy has been premised on the simple principle of friends of all, satellites of none. Barbados, therefore, has always remained and will remain proud to have Cuba as a treasured friend. Barbados established relationships with the People's Republic of China when others failed to. We may be small, but we are principled. Our relationship is based with Cuba on a historical foundation rooted in solidarity, cooperation, and complementarity of a common Caribbean civilization. And we say that the long-standing economic embargo on Cuba continues to be a cause of serious concern. I reaffirm Barbados' strong opposition to this unilateral action, and more so, the recent activation of Article 3 of the Helms-Burton Law imposes new restrictions and further exacerbates the situation. And I ask you here, to what end? To what end? The continued attempt to stop the people of Cuba from living with basic human dignity is unacceptable. Mr. President, it is time that the global community recognizes that small island developing states are truly equal partners in the international arena, and that our special development needs must be taken into account in the multilateral forum. Growth in the economies of the developed states, we contend, must not come at the existence of the very viability of small developing statements. Small children have a phrase for it. They call that cowardice. They call that bullying. They call that crowding out. We ask for fairness, equity, and opportunity to take our legitimate place in the global community. That is all. That was the promise of our membership of this organization. And I know that today I have a duty to acknowledge and commend the heroic efforts of our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who is swimming against the rising tide of anti-multilateralism and anti-globalism, navigating the dangerous currents of dwindling resources and resisting, my friends, the efforts to set adrift all of the excellent work done over the last 7.5 decades by leaders across the world and his predecessors to ensure development, peace, and the dignity of human family. As a small nation, we are not only committed to multilateralism, we also understand that it is the one thing that protects our sovereignty and our ability to navigate in this world. It is our buffer against the display of might, and it is our shield against tyranny. We continue to view the United Nations as an important mechanism for achieving international peace and security and sustainable development for all countries, but in particular for the most vulnerable. Historic examples have proven that national interests are best advanced by pursuing collaboration, partnership, and a multilateral approach. No country trades or grows its economy on its own. Therefore, a multilateral trading system and an international economic order which respond to the needs of all nations, even the smallest, is of critical importance, and all of us in here know it. It is for that reason that Barbados intends to and hopes to host the 15th session of UNCTAD in October next year, 2020. We will be the first small island nation ever to host the UNCTAD conference, and Barbados welcomes the unique opportunity to work with others, our partners, to shape the trade and development agenda of the organization for the next 4 years, conscious that if ever small island developing states needed to be at the center of those discussions, it is now. To discuss trade and climate, trade and the blue economy, sustainable development for our people. And we look forward to forming those critical partnerships with all UN member states to make UNCTAD 15 an inclusive and a successful event. Mr. President, the United Nations exists to identify the commonalities to help us get past the working differences. As I said earlier, there is no progress without communication, and there is no progress without talking to each other. If the consequences of not talking to each other, my friends, are a little less sleep, then it is okay, and we can accept that. But when the consequences are the loss of life and the loss of livelihood, then we are in trouble. And that is why then there are those who will believe that we are invisible. Because those who should know better and who can do more are turning a blind eye and with impunity. If the truth be told, how many times have we been ignored on too many matters? And I ask myself, really, how many times are we going to come and make the same speech from this platform? SIDS are the canaries of the international community. You will ignore us at your peril. We are the canaries. We are only noticed regrettably when it is time to garner votes or to support seats on the Security Council, or when a person wants a candidate to head up an international organization. For real. It's only then that real value is placed on us. And you ask yourself, how can people be so transparent and so lacking in dignity and conscience? May I remind you, as I had cause to do earlier this week, that the Alliance of Small Island States represents 20% of the membership of this august body, 43 states. And our votes and our voices do count. They do. But our lives and our dignity count more. We are committed to action. to taking the necessary action to overcome the deleterious effects of that which threatens to destroy us, climate change. As Dylan Thomas wrote, and I quote, "We will rage against the light and not go silent into that good, or should I rather say that dark night." The world, my friends, is at a crossroads. And we continue to be reminded of it as recently as this morning with the speeches that we have heard. This United Nations will only survive if it remains relevant to the needs of our people and to solving the great problems, not all, but the great problems of our time and the challenges of humanity, saving where we live, living with others with respect and dignity and in peace, and supporting equality, not supporting the dominance of any one race or any one religion or any one sect. The only way this mission of this entity can be guaranteed is if country by country, and multilaterally I may add, we stand on principle, on the principles that have protected us from another great war for the last 74 years. Thank God for those principles and our avoidance of that great war. And the principles that have inspired us continually to achieve and maintain human dignity and prosperity as we set about reaching the SDGs. The baton, my friends, is now with us. It is our turn. Will we hold it firmly and continue the race to help the marginalized, those unseen and those without voice, really the forgotten of this world? Or will we drop the baton when we know better from the experiences of the last century where so many died needlessly? My country and my region are clear as to where we stand. There is no war worth it. There is no profit sufficiently large to be worth the price of war or the destruction of our planet. The people of Barbados, and I as their leader, choose to honor the legacy of our great civilization, our freedom fighters who fought for better. Barbados chooses to fight for the path of peace, prosperity, planetary protection, and hope. Barbados chooses love of self, love of neighbor, love of planet, love as a virtue. Barbados chooses a spirit of love, courage, and hope, brotherhood for all humanity. We pray that each of you will make the same decision. I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
In the name of the General Assembly, I would like to thank Her Excellency, the Minister of Security of Barbados, for her statement. I will now give the floor to His Excellency Edi Rama, the Prime Minister and Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Albania. And may I request the protocol to escort His Excellency.
يسرني أن أرحب بمعالي السيد إيدي راما رئيس الوزراء ووزير شؤون.
I have great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Edi Rama, Prime Minister and Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Albania, and invite him to address the General Assembly.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, for more than 7 decades since this podium was raised to withstand the weight of the entire world's concerns, and about more than a half of the century, since the gloomy histories of the Cold War, bright promises of democratic reconstruction in aftermath to the Berlin Wall, and caring on the needy people, as was, among others, the case with Kosovo Albanians in face of the genocide in late 90s, have passed through these walls. Still, even in the 74th session of the General Assembly, this hall has again witnessed a dozen of complaining voices, various diverging worldviews, and a substantial number of predictions on incoming threats. Many years after the end of history was announced and vast enthusiasm on globalism has prevailed, we underwent through the worst economic recession since the Great Depression of 1930, experienced the rise of violent extremism and terrorism, beginning with Al-Qaeda, killing nearly 3,000 innocent people on 19/11, and got exposed to a climate change whose effects are felt in the air we breathe in the 21st century. Globalism can be criticized or endorsed. After all, this does not matter. What matters is that it exists. Nationalism might sound an attractive alternative at times, and so it appears especially nowadays. But the range of issues we together face is essentially transnational. Willy-nilly, we find ourselves in a context where the distinction between national interests and global priorities is largely blurred, if not entirely dissolved. We do live in a world that, in parallel with increasing opportunities, new threats are emerging at horizon and new risks are appearing at fore. Even worse, a number of such threats and risks, despite how well vocalized, do not usually receive the proper response. We live under the ozone that is thickening and climate that is melting icebergs. While security mechanisms have been sophisticated and intelligence mechanisms were improved, illegal migration, radicalization, and extremism, organized crime and human smuggling has not challenged just our security environment, but also the quality of our democracy. This range of issues clearly requires the mobilization of national capacities, but also a much more efficient interaction in the transnational level. Mr. President, last Friday I had to interrupt my flight to New York while landing in Frankfurt because my country was struck by a powerful earthquake. The country has been severely damaged, but thank God no life was lost. As these were not enough, just before the aftershocks had subsided, the country was conquered by a storm and torrential cycle of rain, which made the situation even more unbearable for the vulnerable people. Science has progressed a lot. Whether for good or bad, this goes well beyond this discussion, but not enough as to be able to predict the emergence of earthquakes in advance. However, if this is the case with earthquake, this is certainly not the case with the climate change, the deterioration of which can be dealt beforehand in a number of ways. Anyhow, no country on earth is sufficiently immune against hostilities of distorted nature, neither strong enough to cope with it. So I'm pleased to inform you that Albania has been working hard on achieving the United Nations global goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% in the next decade and to net zero emissions by 2050 in accordance with Paris Agreement of 2016. In addition, we have adopted a strategy on climate change, mitigation action plan of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as a national plan for adaptation to climate change. This makes Albania the first and the only country in the Western Balkans to have a consolidated strategy on climate change. We have undertaken a number of many other initiatives to keep our sky blue and make the horizon of our future look greener. New energy efficiency standards in construction, a coming ban on non-degradable plastic bags, a moratorium on hunting and lodging, and a growing tree planting campaign are only part of our ambition to make Albania a leading example in the green agenda. This endeavor, in fact, also serves as a reminder that the climate action requires daily commitment. This is true of climate change, but it is certainly true when it comes to that other great concern we all share about the world today: security. There is a saying from a long-experienced army general, if I'm not mistaken, that there are two sorts of countries in the world: small countries and the countries that are not aware that at the end of the day they are still small. Albania might be a small country from a global perspective, but yet is aware of its global responsibility. Since the decade of NATO membership, regardless of the vast challenges it has faced, Albania has deployed its troops in Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Latvia, Mali, and Afghanistan in order to leave a mark in a world that should be safer and anticipate the future that must be brighter. Only a few months ago, 2 Albanian soldiers who served in NATO's enhanced forward presence in Latvia lost their life in line while dismantling explosives. Albania proudly remembers them today in world's largest gathering of all nations. Their martyrdom is a universal reminder of the noblest of causes: protection of freedom, security, and providing security to maintain freedom. Regardless of such tragic loss, which hurts deeply and left a void in our souls, Albania still expresses its deep willingness and its firm readiness to take up new responsibilities in Iraq in order to support its stabilization efforts. After the triumph on ISIL was declared, each of the nations gathered here shall be aware of the risks that come along with post-caliphate metamorphosis. That is, small terrorist groups that might seem to have finally disappeared, but still retain their capacity to launch brutal attacks. The size of the territory, neither its geographic location, does not prevent world's nations from carrying out the responsibilities they have and meeting obligations that are required. Albania is particularly concerned by Iran's destabilizing behavior in the Middle East, but also often disruptive activities in relation to the Iranian opposition community, who have generously been hosted in our country after having been subject to despicable massacres elsewhere. We had to react firmly in relation to a number of Iran's illicit activities against our national security interests, and we stand firm on the side of the countries that have been hurted by such activities, both on the sea and in their land. Despite the number of population, the size of territory, or geographic location, no country is too small to perform its global responsibilities. Albania will build upon such a multilateral experience by taking and increasing multilateral commitment. Next year, Albania will take the chairmanship of the OSCE with a special focus on protracted conflicts in and around Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, Transnistria, to mention but few cases. Albania will also devote a special attention to fight against any form of discrimination, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia first and foremost, by relying on its example of interreligious tolerance, as well as strengthening the role of the women in peace-building activities by reflecting the feminist spirit of the nation. Albania has provided a century-long historical example on how harmony among Muslims, be they Sunni or Bektashi, and Christians, Catholic or Orthodox, and Jews, is not only accidentally possible, but also socially fruitful. Even though often regarded as a Muslim majority country, we are the land where Saint Teresa is the highest national symbol, after having been for a long time, as Mother Teresa, our most distinguished daughter. It is perhaps such human solidarity and commitment to universal goodness that should still guide us in facing great threats to peace and security around the globe today. Given its exceptional historical example, as well as its now highly mature multilateral experience, Albania do not any longer hide the ambition to serve as a non-permanent member in the United Nations Security Council during 2022 and 2023. So I call on all nations assembled here today to take a positive note of Albania's Security Council bid for 2022. Needless to remind, having global ambitions that does not mean lacking regional attention. Western Balkans, from where I come, underwent long history of oppression and conflict. The region as a whole underwent two of the 20th century cruelest evils: communist dictatorship and inter-ethnic wars. As a result of this heritage, Western Balkans happen to be the most underdeveloped region at the heart of Europe, with a number of disputes still going on. Albania has particularly celebrated the reaching of Prespa Agreement, which put to an end a decades-long dispute between Greece and North Macedonia. Albania was actively engaged in making it possible and see it as an inspiring example for settling other open disputes. In order to build stronger ties and streamline our cooperation by building a roadmap for connectivity and mobility in our region, Albania is working closely with Kosovo, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, and look forward to do so with Serbia itself. However, despite the fact that the climate of regional cooperation has improved significantly, the open dispute between the Republic of Kosovo and Serbia still hinders the potential of the development of the whole region. Regardless of the issues that a young democracy like Kosovo might naturally face, it is more than clear that for a bit more than a decade since its independence was declared, the Republic of Kosovo has managed to build a vibrant democracy, prove itself as a reliable partner in the region, and never wavered from its Euro and Atlantic commitment. The time has come that all countries of this assembly, especially and firstly our Serbian friends, recognize the independence of Kosovo, to do justice to history and to acknowledge reality. as the only reliable base to build a common, better future. Dear Serbia, independent Kosovo is a reality that cannot be reversed. So stop living in denial and make history for yourself and the world by landing in the space of reality. It is important, too, that Kosovo has been given the opportunity to join all international and regional organizations that any sovereign independent country in the world has a right to join. And it is my sincere hope and my daily commitment that the Western Balkans manage to break with their past once and forever and work together to build their economies, integrate their markets, and provide a much better future, thinking and working for their children and not talking anymore about their ghosts. In this regard, I must underline a fact that I've stressed repeatedly to my European colleagues. It is inexcusable that Kosovo, a country of just 2 million people, remains to date the only country where its people are still isolated from the whole network of visa liberalization regime. Listen to this. From 2014, more than 100 million people have been added to the multitude of people that can enter EU with no visa. How possibly EU can still keep hostage just 2 million people that have fought so hard to get their freedom and are so firmly committed to their EU perspective. So dear EU, stop this nonsense. On this note, I must also emphasize that stability and security, prosperity and democracy of the region can only be guaranteed by European perspective. For this reason, providing a positive response to Albania and North Macedonia's ambition to open accession talks will not merely be a reward of their merits, but also strategically the wisest decision to be taken by the EU for the EU. When the first man stepped in the moon in mid-1960, which by the way was not only a sign that man is expanding the limits of universe, but also heading to the future, Albania's universe was the narrowest kind of its orientation backward. As the most isolated country on earth, Albania was today's North Korea of back then's Europe. While the heritage of the past still affects the dynamics of the country in multiple ways, Albania today joins world's nations in the attempt to build a brighter future by performing its institutional tasks in accordance with the 2030 Agenda. My government considers the implementation of the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda an important part of Albania's vision for development and integration. Indeed, we see it as an important complement to the agenda determined by our effort to join the European Union. Our national strategy for development and integration combines Albania's European integration agenda with that of the UN 2030 agenda. We are committed to both these agendas for a very simple reason. We believe that they constitute a roadmap for the modernization of our country and institution and for the raising of our society. Among the most important milestones in this agenda are the action plan on Roma, Egyptians, and LGTB, and persons with disabilities, which contain concrete plans which are being implemented that will guarantee the rights of these groups that happen to be very often unfairly and unjustly marginalized. In addition to this, we have made great progress in terms of gender equality, with more women than ever before represented in government, parliament, regional councils, and the public administration. And I'm very proud to say that in my government there are more women than men. Quite a good sign to be successful. In his memorable visit in Tirana in 2014, Pope Francis advised the youth of Albania to fly higher and higher and higher, but never forget their nest. While this sounds almost divine advice, it is also absolutely a realistic demand, not only for Albania, but apparently for the entire region. We are pursuing special programs to enable our diaspora anchor their future with their country of origin in the context of our broader ambition to convert the phenomena of brain drain in the process of brain circulation. Still, there is another element that I would not go without mentioning. Albania's unprecedented justice reform, the process of making a major cleanup by removing corrupt judges and prosecutors from the system, as well as establishing new judicial institutions tailored to tackle corruption and organized crime at highest levels, in transforming the entire physiognomy of the country. The corruption in the judiciary for decades did not only prevent justice from taking place, but became also an impediment to make justice be the rule of our daily existence as a society. As the new justice system gradually takes shape and becomes fully operational, we hope that it will seriously curtail all acts of corruption and abuse of power, and will finally assure the triumph of the sense of justice and of the rule of law over all the country I do deeply love and proudly represent it here today. Thank you very much.
باسم الجمعية العامة أود أن أشكر معالي السيد إيدي.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank Mr. Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania, for his statement. The General Assembly will now hear an address by Mr. Robert Alexander Muniz, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. May I request a protocol to escort His Excellency.
ببالغ السرور أرحب بمعالي السيد هوبرت ألكسندر مينيس رئيس وزراء جزر الكومنولث وأدعوه إلى مخاطبة الجمعية العامة.
On your election to the presidency of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I assure you and the members of the Bureau of the support of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during your tenure. I also extend congratulations to your predecessor for her leadership of the 73rd session. It is my privilege to speak in this assembly on behalf of the people of the Bahamas. In the context of the global climate emergency, it is also my responsibility as a citizen of a vulnerable state to speak on behalf of the community of small island developing states, on behalf of the peoples of the Caribbean and CARICOM, on behalf of coastal communities and others around the world who are especially vulnerable from rising sea levels and from increasingly powerful storms. I commend Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his extraordinary leadership in focusing the international community on the global climate emergency. This global emergency poses a myriad and dire effects for all of humanity, especially the poorest in the global commons. I thank His Excellency for his visit to the Bahamas in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, which was one of the most destructive hurricanes the Atlantic has ever generated. It is a generational tragedy for the Bahamas. Hurricane Dorian decimated or devastated swaths of Grand Bahama Island, Abaco, and the Abaco Keys, respectively, our second and third most populated centers. I also thank Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, for his visit in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. Mr. President, the Bahamas is an archipelago of many islands and keys, stretching over approximately 750 miles from off the southeast coast of Florida in the United States of America to the northeastern tip of the Republic of Cuba. We inhabit approximately 180,000 square miles of ocean with 16 principal islands, with cities, towns, and settlements, with names like Marsh Harbor, Hope Town, 8 Mile Rock, West End, and SPHINX Keys, reflecting the rich and diverse heritage of our country. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield once noted, and I quote, "From space, the Bahamas is the most beautiful place on earth." He went on to say, "The Bahamas are gorgeous. The deep trench in the ocean floor, called the tongue of the ocean, which comes between the islands, is the most beautiful, deep indigo color," end quote. With great pride, we delight in sharing our archipelago. Tourism is our principal industry. We are stewards of this natural treasury for ourselves and for humanity. But this surpassing beauty and our very existence as a country of many low-lying islands and over 2,400 keys are under grave threat. It is a threat which we did not cause. It is a threat which we cannot survive on our own. While many countries have coastal cities or zones, the entire Bahamas is a coastal zone of many keys and islands in an extensive archipelago. Over the last 3 decades, hurricanes have grown increasingly lethal throughout our region. In the words of the